My name is Yasmina Greco. I'm with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's event. Today, folks, we have a real treat for you all. We have Jesse Cravens and Jeffrey Burtoft for a battle of the HTML5 hackers, and they're going to talk to you all about rethinking the possibilities of browser-based apps with HTML5.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
This is Jeff Burtoft, and I have with me today here Jesse Cravens. So I'm calling in from Redmond, Washington this morning. Put a picture of us on the screen there. Now, Jesse and I don't normally, in fact, we haven't yet done this presentation on the web where we can't see each other. So it'll kind of be a new experience for both of us. And it might be hard for me to tell, what Jesse's thinking and what him to tell what I'm thinking. So you may need to be patient with us at time to time. But we're really excited about presenting this content to you today. So before we get started, Jesse wanted to talk to you a little bit about HTML5hacks.com. Jesse?
Yeah, so we've got a distribution list out there up at the top right-hand corner of HTML5hacks.com. And we wanted to go ahead and give away a free copy of the book today. If you want to enter a random draw, we're going to draw somebody's email address directly after this presentation, and we'll send you a free ebook. Now, if you already have our book, we'll send you whichever O'Reilly book you like.
Awesome. Okay, so before we get started, we're going to kind of tell you a little bit about ourselves and the software that we'll be using today. Jesse and I are both avid coders. We code for a living. We code in our free time. So today we're only going to have a few slides, and we're going to be showing you a lot of code and a lot of demos. So as far as myself, again, my name is Jeff Burtoft, and I live in Bellevue, Washington, which is right outside of Redmond. I work for a company called Microsoft. Most of you have probably heard about that. And I work directly with the HTML5 community. So I work with developers to help them implement HTML5 and other web standards. Jesse?
Yeah, and as stated before, I work for Frog. I'm based out of the Austin studio in Texas. And I started developing web applications in 1999, so I've been doing this for about 14 years. And I work mostly in the free and open source area, mostly in JavaScript, some Ruby on Rails development as well. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time doing rich internet applications and single-page apps. Jeff, what OS will you be using today? I'm going to make an assumption here.
Yeah, so I'll be using Windows 8, and I'm going to be running this on a Lenovo laptop that has a 10-point touch screen built into it.
Okay, I'll be using Mac OS 10, and just to be honest, Jeff, I've pretty much avoided developing Windows over the years, but I'm still trying to figure out why I would want to have touchscreen on my laptop.
Well, a lot of people who haven't tried it ask that same question, and it's actually really similar to, I think, what Motorola used to say about the cell phone. Why would anyone want to touch their phone on the screen? And, well, we saw what happened there, so just hold tight, Jesse. We'll see what happens.
All right.
Okay. As far as browsers, today I'll be using Internet Explorer 10. It's the newest version of Internet Explorer. It's fast and fluid and built from the ground up for touch. It was released last October with Windows 8, and then most recently it has been released for Windows 7 as well.
And as far as browsers are concerned for me, I used to work solely in Firefox back in the early Firebug days, but I would say that Chrome has taken its place as the premier development browser, in my opinion. Even Firefox feels a little antiquated to me now, but unfortunately, if I want to validate my CSS and my polyfills, I have to run a virtual machine for ID 899.
Yeah, and no matter what the browser is, if it is HTML5 compliant, then we love it for sure. Now we're going to be showing a lot of code samples today, and for my code samples, I'm going to be using my favorite IDE, which is Visual Studio, and today I'll be using Visual Studio Express. for the web, which is a free IDE that's put out there by Microsoft. And if you've never used it, I highly suggest you go and download it because it is an amazing IDE, and best of all, it's free. Jesse?
I prefer IDEs that are easy to configure and get out of my way. So I'll be using text or Sublime Text. And I used to use TextMate, but it switched over to Sublime Text. You'll see that today.
Jesse, if you like IDEs that get out of your way, I've got a great one for you. It ships with Windows, and it's called Notepad. It's perfect. All it is out of your way.
I agree, Jeff. I think writing code in Notepad builds character. I think once you get your skills to a certain level, you just really want to do things quickly and get your IDE out of your way.
Sounds good. All right. Jesse and I are the authors of HTML5 Hacks on O'Reilly. And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about a project that we put together. So, Jesse, do you want to do that introduction?
Sure. So yeah, all that aside, we obviously use different tools. It's the finished product that really matters, not the tools that you use to get there. And in our book, we put together 90 hacks, small little demonstrations of HTML5 specifications that, and sometimes we even combined a number of them. We really wanted to break down these specs into consumable chunks. And as we got into this, the process became very competitive. I think in the end, we actually contributed about 250 pages each. Well,
actually, I think, Jesse, it was more like 252 from me and 248 from you, but who's really counting?
Yeah, well, I think you tended to ramble, and your content wasn't as complex as mine, but that's okay.
I do tend to ramble.
So what we want to do today is we want to extend upon the book, right? So in Chapter 10, we took you through building pro HTML5 applications with Node.js. And today you're going to see what we think would be Chapter 11. And we're going to actually build an app or show you how we built an app and all of the different hacks that went into creating this ultra hack. And the name of the app is Nerd Cluster. I'm going to go ahead and log in to this application. Pretty standard login. And you'll see that I've got the console open at the bottom of the screen. And you're going to start seeing some logs there, and I'll talk more about that later. But as new individuals log into the app, you're going to see a log there, and the end result for the user will be that you can see a pin on the map along with your Twitter handle if you use Twitter to authenticate, and also a nerd type. So over there in the legend, you'll see that there's all these different types of nerds that are logging into Nerd Cluster and clustering on a map. And this is the use case that we're going to be using all of these different specifications around today to build an app for you. So, Jeff, do you have anything to add to that?
So, both writing the book and building this application has been a lot of fun. And as you can tell, Jesse and I do come from very different approaches to HTML5. And at times it has gotten a bit competitive. So I think that the hacks that I've contributed to this app are the coolest. And Jesse thinks the apps that he has contributed are the coolest. So today we're going to lay them out to you. We're going to show you our favorite hacks. And at the end, we'll decide which of us is the ultimate HTML5 hacker. So Jesse, why don't you start it out and give us your best?
Okay, well, I'm going to start with something rather simple. I don't know if you noticed, but whenever we launched this app, there was a couple of different links to get to different forms. And there was a sign-up form and a login form. So I want to start with web forms because HTML5 is having an impact on the way in which we can develop web forms and also an impact on the end user and some of the validation we can give them and user feedback we can give them easily without having to necessarily use JavaScript and CSS. So, set this up here. So as the screen refreshes there, you'll see that what I did was I just pulled these forms out into a static HTML file, and so that we could work with them and then I could show you the basics of the code. So this is pulled out away from the actual nerd cluster code base. So the specific HTML5 and CSS3 specs that I think are having a large impact on web forms are these 4 items at the top here. New form elements, new input types, new attributes, and then some CSS3 styling that is basically some pseudo-class selectors. So first, let's just jump into the 5 new elements that are available. And I'm going to show you 2 of these. I'm going to show you a progress bar and a data list. Okay. So the progress bar over here in the login form is currently empty. And let's just go back and look at the markup. You'll see that it's a very simple now. Once my browser catches up with me, it's a very simple progress element. And I've put an ID on it, I've put a value, and I've also put a max. Well, the thing that we used to have to do with this is use existing HTML elements like divs, and then style those, and then use a lot of JavaScript to make a progress bar. But now I can actually just get access to the value through JavaScript, and I'll show you that real quick. Here's a very simple demo of changing the progress bar through JavaScript. The other item is over here in the nerd type input field. It's now using data list, and traditionally we would use select and options. And the difference between a data list is that it actually will do some autocomplete for you. So there you can see I want to select either a developer or a designer. Or let's just change that to an M, and we could also just enter in our own custom nerd, something like a master chef or something like that. Something we couldn't do very easily with select input or select fields before. Okay. Now the other items are input types, right? So there's 12 new input types, and I will show you a couple of these today. I'll show you the email input type, the date, and also the color. But you can tell here there's quite a few more that you can now use with HTML5. So let's go down here. Let's go back to this time we'll look at a sign-up form again. And let's just say that we wanted to capture the user's date of birth. Before, again, we'd have to use JavaScript, and we would style that. Maybe we would use a jQuery UI library or something like that to use a jQuery plugin. Now we get access to this natively, and it also exposes CSS hooks for us to style it. And then the same thing with the favorite color. I've also got a color input type here. And finally, the email address, which you can see here in both forms, email and email. Okay. And then there's also 13 new attributes added to the specifications, and I'm going to show you a couple of these. I'll show you autofocus, I'll show you placeholder, And then we'll get into required. So in autofocus, you can see here that I've placed it on just a random, you probably wouldn't do this, but you might want to move this around and place it on something that wasn't necessarily by default. So I can move autofocus around. Now you'll see when I refresh the page, depends on which, one second. I'm in Form 1, put the autofocus, and then I take the autofocus and I can put it on any of the elements to have it autofocus on that particular element. And then placeholder is how I'm getting these the placeholder text into the input fields. And that helps a lot because previously we'd have to do that with JavaScript and then style it with CSS. But now we get hooks for it. And then finally, the required field, which I'm going to go down here and show you some of my CSS styles. You'll see that I get this really handy pseudo-class selected called required. And all I have to do in my HTML is add the required attribute, and it will go ahead and style it the way I want. And I put the blue border around that particular input field. And finally, browser-side validation used to be solely JavaScript-based. Now if I try to submit a form and I have a required attribute on it, I get a validation prompt that's native to the browser, and I can go ahead again and go ahead and style that on my own. So that's web forms in a nutshell. And after that, I believe, Jeff, it's 3-0 after me showing these three different areas of web forms.
So that is good, Jesse. And I will admit, it used to take a lot of JavaScript to do form validation. And it would take a lot of logic on the client. And now that we can do that with HTML and CSS, it not only makes it run faster because the browser is taking care of it, but it makes it a lot easier for us as developers. So I'm going to go ahead and take control now. The cool things that we were able to do all with CSS. Now, when we built this application, we understood that a lot of its use would happen when people were out and about. So we wanted to make sure that it was very mobile friendly. So in order to be able to use the screen space as well as we could, we wanted to make the map take up the entire screen, and we also wanted to give the users the ability to have controls at the same time. So what we did is we added this button up here called View Profile, and if you select it, the screen's going to flip around, and it's going to show you the content on the back. Now I'm going to do that a couple times because the animation may be difficult to see through this screen share. So what we're able to do is we're able to use the same screen space for both the map and for the profile information. And the user can just hit the button and flip it back and forth. Now to make this attractive for the users, we're actually doing a card flip style transition in between one screen and the other. So I'm going to show you how we did that today. Now first of all, you can see on the screen what we actually have are two divs that flow one right after another in the markup, and then we use CSS positioning to lay them on top of each other. So there are actually two divs that are stacked on top of each other. Now I'm going to go through a little bit of the CSS that we use for this. And one of the things I want to point out is that I am only showing you the dash WebKit and the dash MS and the compliant way to write this code. I took out the other browser extensions just to kind of clean it up a little bit and make it presentable. So we have the two divs stacked on top of each other. And what we've done is we've taken the back card and we've rotated it. so that it's completely turned around and flipped 180 degrees. So now we have two cards stacked on top of each other, one facing forward and one facing backwards. Now, as we flip the card, we actually add a class to the parent element, which will change the properties of both the front card and the back card at the same time. So what we've done is whenever we add that class flipped, we then do a transform that changes the rotation of both of the cards so that they then both flip 180 degrees and turn themselves around. Now, because on the card itself we have a transition, it actually will transition that transform. So the transform that turns it around 180 degrees has a transition that applies to it, which will give us a smooth flip between the two. Now, in order to make sure that the one card doesn't show through if one card is bigger than the other one, we actually have our back face visibility that we toggle between hidden and visible for the cards. So that way, whenever the card is flipped backwards, we have the back face visibility hidden so that the inverted content doesn't turn around. And what we have done is we have a very simple, yet I think elegant, way to switch between two different pieces of content using the same screen space. And this was all done with CSS. Now, before we had these CSS3 properties, we used to have to do this with JavaScript. And I'm going to switch back to the slides now. It would take us a lot of JavaScript to accomplish the same thing that we can do with just a couple lines of CSS. The CSS that I used to make this happen was the CSS transform, the CSS backface visibility, and CSS transitions. So if we tally that up, that brings us to an even score of 3-3. So Jesse, what else do you have?
Okay, well, let's get into the real meat of this application, because we're kind of dancing around the outer skirts of it and not getting into what it's really doing. So if anybody's watching the Nerd Cluster account right now, it's actually got 112 connected users. So I want to show a little bit about how those people's location is ending up on this map. And to do that, we go ahead and share my screen here. We're going to look at the geolocation API. Yeah, so we're starting to see our nerd clusters form across the globe. Looks like everywhere from Central America to Europe and Italy, and of course quite a few in the United States. Let's talk a little bit how this actually works. So I'm going to jump back over into the code. Try to get this at the right size here. So I'm going to talk about the geolocation API. I'm going to focus on four main aspects of it, or four objects. We're going to talk a little bit about the geolocation object itself, or property itself, the getCurrentPosition method, the position success object, and the watchPosition method. So anytime you want to obtain the end user's location, you can use the geolocation here, and you want to check for it because not all browsers support it. And that's what I'm doing here in this if statement. And then you go in and you actually can use this method called getCurrentPosition, which if you've used XML HTTP requests or AJAX, you're probably used to passing around a success object and an error object. It's really very similar to that. I can also do this enable high accuracy and set it to true, which will tell the device to use the mechanisms necessary to gain the best location. And in the book, I go into great detail about how location services work and what protocols it uses to obtain that location. But if you set it to true, there is a side effect here. It will use more of your battery life most of the time. So, but we're doing that and to try to get a really highly accurate location. So the position success object or method here, the callback function, is where you get passed in this position object where I can go in and I can actually grab the longitude and latitude. And what I'm doing is I'm taking that and I'm putting it into a send data object that I'm then going to send out over WebSockets. Now I'm going to get more into how the WebSockets implementation works here later, but we'll come back to this. The other method I want to make you aware of is the watch position method. If you can use this, it works very similar to the get current position method, except here natively it will update as you move. So every time the user's location changes, it will update. So there's no need to actively poll for this position, right? The device will determine its optimal polling interval, and it will call your callback function whenever it determines that that user's position has changed. And that's all I have for the geolocation API. And Jeff, I think that makes it 3.4 or 4.3, however you want to say that.
Okay, I'll give that to you. And geolocations is cool. I remember when that used to be something that you could only do in a native application. That's one of the things that made native apps popular, that they could interact with hardware. But now it's something that we can easily do with JavaScript and HTML5. Okay, so you probably noticed that there was a map that was a big part of our application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch a little bit about where we get that data and how we put it onto the screen. And as I'm sharing my screen, the key technology that we use for this is actually a canvas tag. So we're using data from a open source application called leaflet.js, which brings in the map data for us. And then as the user goes up or down or zooms in or zooms out of the map, we go out and collect that map data from leaflet.js and we paint it on a canvas. That way we can actually assemble our images together. We can reuse images that we've downloaded before, and it makes it quite easy and quite fast to manage. Now in IE10, the canvas tag is hardware accelerated, as it was in IE9 as well, so it makes it for a really great performing smooth experience. Now what I've done is I've actually pulled out a few lines of code from our application to kind of show a real simplified version of how we do this. Now when you're working with the canvas tag, what we're actually doing in this case is we're writing to the 2D context. So in Visual Studio here, I have a couple lines of code. What we would need to do is the first thing you need to do is have a pointer to your canvas. And then from your canvas, you have to have a pointer to the context. So in this case, I am using canvas, which points to a canvas element called myCanvas. And then for the variable CTX, I'm pointing to canvas.getContextToD. So this is where I'm going to have all of my write and read APIs is now going to be in my CTX object. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to load in image data. And to load in image data, I'm going to do something similar to this where I create an image and add a load event to it so that I know when the image data is there. And then when I have that image data, I'll simply write it onto my canvas. So I'm going to use this method called CTX draw image. So it's going to pull in that image and draw it wherever I tell my XY coordinates for that image to be drawn. So I'll draw one on top of on another. So as the user goes up, I'll pull data in from the image above them and paint it in. And it also allows me to go ahead and kind of cache image ahead of time. So I can pull in map data ahead of time. And that way, if they do start to pan up or pan down, I can already have my image data ready and then use this draw image API to write it directly onto the canvas. And again, we'll demonstrate it makes for a nice smooth experience where you get the image data ahead of time and we paint it on for the users. We can zoom in and zoom out as well. And allows us to do that programmatically with JavaScript so that we can interact with other DOM elements on the page and then also store data within JavaScript objects to make it easy for us. So that's the canvas tag. You've probably used the canvas tag many times before and didn't even know. A lot of times when you're playing games on the web, the canvas tag is used to draw out that game. If you've used Contrador or Cut the Rope on the web, something like that, that has used the canvas tag. So our canvas tag, which now gives us a score of 4 to 4. So Jesse, I think you might have one more trick up your sleeve.
Yeah, and I think this is probably one of the most exciting of the specifications that we're using in this application. First, what I'm going to show you is just a very simple WebSocket, just the very simple API. This is not actually what I'm using in the application, but I kind of want to prerequisite that with this, right? So I'm actually using a framework called Socket.io. It's a Node.js module available. It's very common, and especially for apps like these. It's easy to get started in sockets. But here, this is just the straight native API without the Socket.io wrapper around it. So all you have to do is instantiate a new WebSocket object, and then you get access to these events. And you can get access to things like onOpen, onMessage, and onClose. Now, you'll notice below here, I have a variable set that's actually calling the connect method on the Socket.io library. That's the API. That's the way the API looks that I'm actually using. So what it sets up for you is a publish subscribe system, or an event bus type system, where you have publishers and you have subscribers, and you have ways in which the server and the clients can emit and subscribe to these messages that come over the WebSocket protocol. Well, first off, let me just explain the WebSocket protocol a little bit more. It's full duplex, bidirectional, which means it's kind of like a telephone system where data can be passed to and from the pipe. It's not like HTTP where it can only go one way. So it's very good for allowing your browser to connect over this tunnel and get data and update the UI in real time. So one of the publishers that I showed you earlier was in the geolocation code was whenever I obtained the user's location, I packaged that up into a data called sent data. And you can see in there that I'm adding in those coordinates that the geolocation API made available to me, and I'm emitting them over this channel called send chords. Now, the subscribers are subscribing over these channels, one called count, which is just the overall count. And if you saw earlier where there was 112 or so users logged on, that number was being incremented over sockets through this channel. And then there's individual channels that weren't actually hooked up. They were all showing 0. But there's hooks here in the code that to pass the individual nerd types over the socket. And then finally, the one that has the most impact, or the most important, is the load chord. So whenever you load the page, load chords channel is called, and the data is sent over the connected user's data is pulled into the application. And finally, on the server side JavaScript running in Node.js, this is the way the API looks. It looks very much the same on the client and on the server, which is very nice. It's the full stack JS philosophy, right? Send chords is fired. When send chords occurs, the event is fired. Then the socket IO server broadcasts the load chords to all the collected clients. So this is really the foundation of the application, and it just wouldn't be very cool without this. So Jeff, I don't see what you could possibly do to up me on this. I mean, this is the coolest part of this whole presentation.
So that is pretty cool, and I know the app just wouldn't function without it. So let's jump back to the slides. There we go. Now, Jesse may think that we're done, but what he doesn't know is I have secretly been working on a project behind his back. And what I've done is I've taken our Nerd Cluster app, and I have turned it into a Windows 8 application. So that sounds like a lot of work, but you may be surprised to find out just how easy that is. Okay, and what you're going to see here is I've switched over to Visual Studio Express 2012 for Windows 8. And again, it's another free application that we put out there. And what we've done in Windows 8 is Microsoft has opened up the environment to be able to write its Windows 8 store apps, so its native applications, using JavaScript, CSS, and HTML5. So I was able to take that same content that we built for Nerd Cluster on the web and turn it directly into a Windows 8 application. And if you see the environment that I have in front of you, it's the same CSS, it's the same HTML. We have our JavaScript files, we have our CSS files, I have the images locally. And what's going to happen is I'm going to go ahead and load this up. And in a moment, you should see Nerd Cluster, the Windows 8 app, appear on my screen. So same functionality that we had on the web, we now have as a local Windows 8 store app. Now, because we had built our application to be responsive and to work on all different clients, I inherit that same functionality whenever I move to Windows 8. So in Windows 8, I have different screen modes that I can put my app in. So this is full screen, and of course it works great, shows beautifully. I may actually want to snap that to the side of my screen. And again, I'm going to have that same functionality working in that view. And let me bring open another app for us. I can then put it in snap view as well and have it function. And out of the box, because we had written this with standard web technologies, it's just going to work as a Windows 8 application. So we're using JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, the same assets, the same code that we had ran on the web, we're now running as a Windows 8 application. So let me switch back to the slides for a minute. I want to talk to just a moment about how this works. So in Windows 8, what we've done is we've actually created a development environment that uses the IE10 rendering engine and uses the IE10 JavaScript engine, and then gives you access to all of the same Windows APIs that you would have access to if you're writing in an application in another language like XAML or C++. So it allows your applications to have access to all the features when you write it in JavaScript, just as it would if it was any other language. So, Jesse, I actually think that is cool enough to match your WebSockets demo, which actually makes the score 5-5, which brings us to a tie. So today we haven't found out who that ultimate hacker is. And we do this all in fun, but to be honest, as long as you're using a compliant browser, as long as you're working with HTML5, then you're going to have the ability to write applications that work across environments and work across devices and across browsers. So this last slide here, we put up some of our favorite tools that you can use to aid in your web app development. So first of all, we have webplatform.org. This is a great place to find out information about HTML5, other W3C standards. how to implement them, what each of the specifications mean. So if you look at a spec and it's confusing to you, I suggest you go to webplatform.org to really kind of understand and get details about what that is. Microsoft has a site out now called modern.ie, and this is a great site for you to run a test on your website to make sure that it is ready for modern browsers and also is going to support legacy browsers for your users as well. Browserstack.com gives you access to all different environments. So if you are a guy like me who works on a PC, but you still want to make sure that it works on Mac or on iOS, BrowserStack will give you those environments to test on. If you're a guy like Jesse who's running on a Mac, it'll give you access to a Windows machine that runs IE6, 7, and 8 so that you can test on those platforms as well. So for questions and answers, we always suggest people go to Stack Overflow. That's a great place to just put a question out there and let experts answer it. And last but not least, we have HTML5Hacks.com, where we put out more hacks just like this, more hacks just like are in the book, and try to make a difficult to implement HTML5 idea really easy to understand. So our message today, we want to make sure that you're excited about HTML5, that you're excited about web standards. We thank you for the time that you've given us. Again, I'm Jeff Burtoft from Microsoft and Jesse Cravens from Frog. There's our Twitter accounts. And we can't help but mention one more time HTML5 Hacks the book. It's 500 pages of HTML5 goodness, and we know each and every one of you would enjoy it. So thanks again for your time.